A young boy witnesses something horrifying happen to a teacher and a schoolmate. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about a short story of interest from a familiar author, although familiar because of how familiar they are in popular culture, not because I've read a lot of them. Today's short story is all about Tygers and a child's need to go to the bathroom. I am referring to Here There Be Tygers by Stephen King, which was written in the book Skeleton Crew, which was published in 1985, although this short story was originally published in 1968. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling a lot of people know who this person is, but for those who don't, Stephen King is an American writer who has been writing since the 1960s. He mostly writes horror, as you see in the books, or books or short stories that he writes, including It, Cujo, The Shawshank Redemption, which was one of his short stories, The Mist, which is, you can actually find it here, and the Dark Tower series, which is probably more science fiction than it is horror, I would say, but they kind of blend together at a certain point. And Stephen King is very well regarded in the horror genre, seen as one of the best. He's very active on Twitter and politically active. He dealt with alcoholism in the 1970s, I believe. He might still deal with that in some capacity. I should also note that while I do know Stephen King and whatnot, I haven't read a lot of his work. And I think that a lot of that has to do with his writing style. I just can't seem to get into it, mainly because the way his characters talk, it feels a bit obnoxious. He's trying to go for a local style based on the area that he's writing, but it feels too, it just stops me as I'm reading. It's like, I don't care how these characters are talking, just tell me that they are talking. And so I've never really finished a King story, but I have finished a couple here, which is pretty good. But without further ado, let's talk about Here There Be Tygers. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Here There Be Tygers focuses on Charles. He is an elementary school boy, and at the beginning of the book, we learned we learned that he needs to go to the bathroom, but he hasn't been telling his teacher because he's afraid that she'll embarrass him. But she seems to notice that he needs to go to the bathroom, and so she calls him out in class and asks if he needs to urinate, and gives him permission to leave, which embarrasses him in front of the other schoolboys, as well as a girl that he is interested in. And so he just leaves with his head down low. He then, as he's going to the bathroom, we see that he wants to go to the basement for some reason, very obsessed with the basement. Something is down there that has caught his interest, but his teacher says he's not allowed to go there because that's no place for little boys and little girls and whatnot. And so he just chooses to go to the bathroom. But when he gets to the bathroom, he heads around the corner and he sees a tiger there, and the tiger doesn't really do anything to him. But he just kind of stands around for a little bit, and then finally one of his schoolmates comes in, and it's a boy named Kenneth, and the boy wants to know what he's been doing, because he was sent by Mrs. Bird, the teacher, because he's been gone for a while. And Charles points out that there's a tiger in the bathroom, which Kenneth doesn't believe him. So Kenneth turns around a corner in the bathroom and seems to go missing. And when Charles looks, he sees that the tiger has a shirt in its mouth, as if though it might have eaten Kenneth. And so Charles has no no other option here, and he has to go to the bathroom at this time in one of the stalls. And when he gets out, Mrs. Bird comes in and is demanding to know where Kenneth is, and she also calls Charles a dirty boy, even though he asserts he was going to wash his hands. I believe Charles tries to stop Mrs. Bird from going around the corner, but she too does, and she also disappears, which seems to be the result of the tiger. And then Charles leaves the bathroom, goes to get a drink, and is only thinking about posters on the wall. And then he goes back into the classroom and keeps his head down as he returns to his seat. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Here There Be Tigers. The story largely seems to be focused on Charles's paranoia, as well as the weird event that happens in the story. So, indeed, paranoia seems to be the theme that King is working with here. Charles believes that others are out to get him for some reason. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence, but we are seeing the story through his eyes, so there is a little bit of a paranoia there, specifically as it relates to Mrs. Bird, because she seems to enjoy embarrassing him. But that might be the paranoia there, where it's Mrs. Bird doesn't want to embarrass Charles, but Charles believes there's a sense of embarrassment there, because that's all he can seem to think about is going to the bathroom and in the basement here. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Mrs. Bird liked it. Mrs. Bird liked making him have a red face in front of Kathy Scott, who never needed to go to the basement. Was that fair? And everybody else. And there you see a little bit of the sort of paranoia that Charles is sort of facing, as well as the obsession with the basement in the story, which I think there's a connection there. What exactly is the basement? Perhaps something horrifying, but we're never really told. But there is that obsession by Charles on what's going on in the basement, and I think all of this has to do with a larger mental illness that Charles might be dealing with that causes maybe hallucinations, maybe this paranoia, and especially this fixation on the basement. It's maybe something down the road, or even currently, will happen with Charles that will that people will be wondering why he did what he did, but I think the paranoia is the starting place there. It's where people will be able to point to and say, oh, why didn't we see then? There was something worth noting there. So Stephen King does do a little bit of good work here with this paranoia, this focus, and you really get creeped out by Charles as a result. The story is called Here There Be Tigers, but what exactly is the tiger in the story? Because it's a bit unusual for there to be a tiger in the bathroom. And I think one of the answers to that question could be Charles's cognitive dissonance from his bad behavior. Because Mrs. Bird and Kenneth both turn the corner and then disappear, and Charles seems upset by the tiger as though it has something to do with himself. So you could say that maybe Charles is killing Mrs. Bird and Kenneth, and he's sort of giving that responsibility to the tiger rather than taking the responsibility for himself. Because again, if something else is doing it, you don't have to accept the responsibility or deal with the guilt. And again, that might be going back to the mental health side of things there. And then there's also the hallucinations that that could be one of the answers, is that Charles is seeing a hallucination and that Mrs. Bird and Kenneth did not enter the bathroom, but rather he's imagining them getting eaten, because again, he's not well, he's not doing too well for himself. But it could also be an actual tiger. Somehow it got into the school, and now Charles is dealing with the effects by having or watching people get eaten. But there's no blood, so I don't think there could be an actual tiger there. I think another explanation, probably the most King explanation, is a horrific demon creature. As you would see in the stories like Dreamcatcher or It, some horrific demon creature has entered our realm and is now shape-shifting in the form of a tiger as a way to play on Charles's sort of fear and his frustrations, maybe feeding on Charles, or maybe Charles is the horrific demon creature and is sort of projecting a tiger out into the world or something like that. We don't really know the answer there, but I think a demon creature is something that King has done before, so it's not out of the sort of realm of explanation. I think it's a lot of fun to speculate what the tiger would be, rather than simply being given the answer, but I also kind of want the answer. So I think King could have done a little better there. The last thing I'll note is that the perspective of a child in this story does change a lot of the meaning of it. Whereas with an adult, you would probably see what happens, and you would have a better understanding. With the child, maybe they view the world a little bit differently, so they can't make sense of certain things. Like maybe something really bad is happening with human beings, like a human being is killing another person, and Charles maybe doesn't understand, so he's just describing what that other human being is doing to a tiger. I don't really know, but that could be an explanation, and I do think it's interesting that King uses the perspective of a child here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Here There Be Tygers by Stephen King. Pretty interesting short story. I do recommend that you check it out. And I also think it's interesting that of all the King, books and short stories out there, I started with this one, which is probably lesser known, but I also think that's probably the most useful because I'm sure people have talked about The Shawshank Redemption and It and all those other books that he's written and all those other short stories that are more well known. Fewer people have talked about these sort of one-off stories that haven't been adapted into movies or TV shows. So I very much enjoyed talking about this, and I hope I can get the word out about more less well-known short stories. If you have any thoughts, let me know in the comments below. Would love to have a conversation with you about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story or this author if they don't already know about both. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and tiger-based travels. Farewell.